Joy Center. I'm Helen Haskell-Ramin, and I have a story to share with you today. My story has props. I'm going to call my story Seal Skin, Soul Skin. And these are my props. I have the seal card from the Oracle deck by Stephen Farmer, the Animal deck, Power deck, and it has a seal on it. And it says, immerse yourself in artistic and creative expression. And then I have a seal, a Maine harbor seal that a friend of my parents, Prue Bailey, made out of local clay when I was a little girl growing up in the state of Maine. Seal Skin, Soul Skin, Part 1. Once upon a time, a long time ago, when I was a little girl, I grew up on the coast of Maine. And in the summers, we grew up, my siblings and I, in a cottage at the head of the cove, a humble cottage at the head of Fish House Cove. And we were free when I was little. My mother set us free to go out and play on the rocks and in the pine and balsam forest. Every day she would give picnics to us and we would go out and play. But the high point of the day was when the tide would come in. And each day it would be a different time of the day. But when it was high tide, we got to go swimming. And my mother would either sit on the rocks and lifeguard, or my big sister would, or they would come in the water with us. And my little brother and I and my older siblings and my mother would swim while my dad was at work. And we would swim, and I got to be a good swimmer very early on because I grew up on the ocean. And I would dive under the water as a little girl with my eyes open, and I would see the kelp, that's like a big seaweed, swaying in the current, and I would see the seagrasses, and sometimes I would see herring and mackerelfish. And once in a while, a seal would swim into our cove, and that would be a real treat. And when I was little, my dad called me Little Mermaid because I loved to swim so much. And some days I would stay in so long that my skin would turn seal blue and mottled, and I would chatter, my teeth would chatter, and I still would not want to get out of the water and put my feet on dry land. I loved the ocean so much. That's part 1. Part 2. Fast forward to grown-up Helen. And I moved away from the ocean. I got married to a Michigan boy and moved to Michigan, 4 years in Ann Arbor, and the past 40 in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And this is where we've raised our kids, and this is really home on the shores of Lake Superior. And I love it here. And yet, the ocean calls to me. I could get teary-eyed because during this pandemic, I have not been back to the ocean. And so, while raising our kids, I was also at one point going to school, finishing my undergrad degree and then getting my graduate degree and then teaching as an adjunct, and I was really busy and also being mother and wife and all the other things that go along with living. And at times I would feel really burned out, even though my graduate degree was in creative writing. And so every spring, about this time, it's mid-April right now, I would get in the car after finals, after the academic school year was over, and I'd say goodbye to my kids and my husband, and I would drive through Canada, through Ontario, along the Ottawa River, and then down through Upper New York, and through Vermont and the White Mountains of New Hampshire and over to Maine. And I would get out of that car in Maine and I would smell the ocean, I would smell that sea breeze and the whiff of fish. And I would greet my mother. Now, my mother, not the mom who would swim with us and paint watercolors as we swam. She would sit on the rocks and do that, but my old mother. And my old mother still sometimes could swim with me into her 70s. But then in her 80s, she had a stroke, and so she couldn't do that anymore. But I would come east, and I would breathe in that sea air, and I would help her with her gardens, and she would cook for me. And I would feel myself, when my boys were little, I would feel myself replenished. And once in a while, we would drive, my mother and I, over about 6 miles away to the mouth of the big wide Kennebec River. And we do this in the springtime when the baby seals were born. And the moms and the dads and the baby seals would play in that greeting place between, that safe place between freshwater and saltwater. And we would watch the seals. And I would feel that aliveness by the ocean. And on these trips east, I would often listen to tapes, because in those days it was tapes, it wasn't even CDs at that point. And I would listen sometimes to Clarissa Estes from the book Women Who Run with the Wolves, and she had a story about seals. It was called Seal Skin, Soul Skin. And it was about specifically for women, but it could be for men too. When we feel ourselves burned out, or we feel the world calling us all over the place and away from our own skin, our own creativity, it's time to call ourselves back, metaphorically, to our sealness, to the ocean, where the seals play and dive in the surf and swim and catch fish and just float on their backs with joy. And so I often listened to that story, and I thought about that way that sometimes raising my family and doing all the things I loved, sometimes I had to really come home to myself. And so one time during those years, my kids were with me, because sometimes, of course, they went to Maine too, and my husband, and they loved my mother as well, my creative mother, and they loved the rocks, and they loved the ocean, and they loved my Uncle John and Aunt Ann, who lived close by, their great aunt and uncle. And one day, Uncle John said, "I'll take you all out in my sailboat, and we'll go for a sail out to sea." And my kids were so excited, and my husband was so excited. And all I wanted to do was be alone. I was feeling one of those feelings of being burned out, and too much time with my kids in the car, and my husband in the car, and my mother in the car, and all the relatives. And so I was brave, and I was probably in my mid-30s then, and I just said, "Uncle John, I know that this is such an opportunity, but I don't want to go. I need to be alone. I need to go sit out on the point of land we grew up on, and I need to have some time by myself this afternoon." And I want to tell you in this part too, that I have never forgotten that afternoon. I have never forgotten. I brought books I loved, I brought my writing, and I sat there in my Crazy Creek camping chair on the tip of the point where I grew up, where I played as a little kid. And I felt myself like the seal, getting myself replenished, finding my creative self again. And that story stays with me in my cells. And so that's part 2. Part 3 of my story. Fast forward, our kids are grown up, they live out west, we have grandkids. My husband and I are here in the Upper Peninsula, loving it, loving Lake Superior, loving our lives. And my husband just retired from 40 years of being a dentist, just in the last 2 weeks. And that's his avocation. That was his, or one of his, real seal creative artistic expressions, to do that fine dental work and to be this service to his community. And so it's been really emotional last month, saying goodbye to his patients, but goodbye to this career, and also emotional looking forward to what things we can do now together. And so about a week and a half ago, I went to a poetry workshop at night on Zoom, because we're in the middle of this Zoom time during this COVID pandemic. And so there I am, and we were supposed to write that night, and I think we were supposed to choose an animal, and somehow I chose the seal. And I tried to write that night, and I thought, I'm just like the seal tonight. All I want to do is swim in the sea and float on my back, and I don't want to think hard, and I don't want to write a polished poem. And so I didn't that night. I probably wrote if you want to know. But that seal stayed with me, and that longing to write a creative expression and to include the seal in this creative expression. And so a few days later, I did write about the seal, and I'm ready to polish this writing, and I love what I wrote. It's big, and it contains the ocean and contains my mother, and it contains playing in the ocean and contains seal. And I felt like I've had to really embrace that seal, not just write that one writing. And so this is part 3. This is the secret of part 3 that I'm sharing with you. So last Thursday night, I lied to my husband. I confessed later, but I lied to my husband. And I said, I am going to work on my taxes for Joy Center, and I'm going to get them ready for our accountant in the morning. And my husband said, oh, I'm so glad, Helen, you procrastinate. And he went to bed. And then I lit all these candles around the house, and I couldn't help it. I got out the tax stuff, I was going to do it, and I smelled the sea. 1,000 miles away, I smelled the sea. And so what did I do? I had the blue candle on the green plate that is the color of the sea, and I put it right next to me. And I took out all my poems, and I took out that seal writing, and I started to just play. And for 2 hours that night, I just, on this beautiful rug in my living room on the floor that looks like the ocean, I was like the seal. I was like the little girl swimming in the cove, and I just allowed myself to play. I allowed myself to tap in to that seal, putting on that seal skin that my mother taught us so much to do when we were little kids. And you know, I went to bed that night, and I slept more soundly than I have slept in weeks. And the next morning, I got up at 8 o'clock. I got the taxes done in 45 minutes. And so, that's the end of my story. And I would say, what do I give you as a gift from the story? I give you seal. I give you that magic of claiming your artistic expression and your creativity and claiming time for it. Because if we don't, we can get dried up and withered out and exhausted, burned out. And so to take that time, claim it. And it can be as simple as lighting a few candles, smelling the ocean 1,000 miles away and saying, you know what, I'm going for it tonight. Taxes can wait until the morning. And so I wish for you creative expression. I wish for you wondrous spring unfurling and new possibilities as we open up at the end of a tunnel of a pandemic and look to see what we truly want to do with our lives. And I wish for you just joyous well-being. So may you be well, may you be happy, may you listen to what brings you most alive and to claim the time for it. Seal is waiting for you.